Super Lucky Disaster Man. Chapter 86, Escape After the Rumors. After continuously chatting with 3 different Dazai Osamus, Komaeda Nagito felt a rather peculiar sensation. Boss Dazai was the most mature of them all, but even with his smile, there was a lingering sense of darkness. The Dazai from the armed detective agency appeared to be carefree and lively, but that too was superficial. Beneath it, there remained an ever-present calm. As for the Dazai Osamu he knew. Komaeda-kun, why did you turn off the recording halfway? Dazai Osamu fiddled with the recorder, complaining in a playful, almost spoiled tone. In comparison, he did indeed seem younger than the other 2, or perhaps he just enjoyed acting his age in front of him. There was an unexpected situation, Komaeda Nagito sighed. I couldn't complete the task you assigned me, Dazai-kun. I truly apologize, someone like me probably shouldn't have taken on the favor in the first place. As expected, not knowing one's limits is a phrase made precisely for someone like me. Dazai Osamu twirled the pen. Komaeda-kun always likes to say things like that. He had known Komaeda Nagito for over a year now and had even frequently stayed at Komaeda Nagito's place. He was already well acquainted with Komaeda Nagito's self-deprecating rhetoric. Now, hearing these words, it was obvious that Komaeda Nagito didn't want to discuss this topic, so he was intentionally avoiding it. He checked the recording time. It was divided into 2 segments, cut off when he went to the prison, then restarted briefly, only to stop again soon after. Judging by the timeline, it must have been when he went to meet the parallel world's Odasaku, that was when the recording stopped. Actually, nothing much happened afterward, Komaeda Nagito calmly said. It was just some things like everlasting friendship. Dazai Osamu. First high school girls, now some everlasting friendship nonsense. Though he hadn't listened to the recording yet, a sense of impending doom was already welling up in Dazai Osamu's heart. Compared to my side, did Dazai-kun achieve his goal? Komaeda Nagito began to change the subject. The 10-year bazooka have all been used. With a childish, defiant look, Dazai Osamu put the recorder back into his pocket and answered, mission accomplished. Today, after running back and forth 3 times, he finally obtained the information he wanted. When you need someone's help, it's natural for the other to make a request in return. All they asked for was help in easing relations with Odasaku. If nothing unexpected happened, he would come out ahead. Getting to see another version of himself as a joke, getting to chat with a different Odasaku, and having the opportunity to gather information on the parallel world, in any case, it was all worthwhile. The problem was that this conclusion assumed the other party wouldn't do anything. Judging from the current situation, even the most basic trust between people was completely gone. Although there wasn't much trust to begin with, things were worse than he had imagined. It was getting late, and Dazai Osamu wasn't planning to stay long in Vongola's territory. After saying goodbye to a few people with Komaeda Nagito, they headed back home. Just like Mori Ogai and Komaeda Nagito said, the Port Mafia merely spread word of Executive Dazai Osamu's escape, claiming to be on the hunt for him. In reality, the only one actively looking for his tracks was Akutagawa Yunosuke, who searched while out on missions. The Port Mafia had essentially abandoned the chase. Incidentally, after receiving news of Dazai Osamu's escape, Akutagawa Yunosuke's first thought was to search Komaeda Nagito's home, but Mori Ogai talked him out of it, further intensifying Akutagawa Yunosuke's animosity toward Komaeda Nagito. Now, he had nothing better to do than hover around the area. He couldn't find Dazai Osamu directly, but surely he could monitor those associated with him. This was a completely personal move. The rest of Akutagawa Yunosuke's team felt embarrassed and had no desire to get involved. If it were a couple of years later, Akutagawa Yunosuke's authority might have convinced others to follow, but for now. After all, the Port Mafia wasn't exactly a well-structured company. Time off was simply whenever there were no assignments. Everyone could see that Mori Ogai had no real expectation of bringing Dazai Osamu back, and so they followed suit, unmotivated and unwilling to waste their time off on Akutagawa Yunosuke's wild goose chase. The worst thing about working is having your boss insist everyone work overtime just because they have to. Thus, when Komaeda Nagito opened his courtyard gate, he suddenly felt a chill at his back. When he turned around, he wasn't surprised to see Akutagawa Yunosuke peeking out from the alley across the street. Akutagawa-kun. He's really here. Komaeda Nagito kept his gaze from wandering, avoiding giving extra trouble to Dazai Osamu, who was sneaking in through the second-floor window. It was precisely because he wasn't planning on hiding that Akutagawa Yunosuke allowed himself to be noticed. Once their eyes met, he strode over and coldly demanded, "Where is Dazai-san?" "Dazai-kun escaped," Komaeda Nagito answered with a smile. "That's what Mori-san told me." At the mention of Mori Ogai, Akutagawa Yunosuke seemed to calm slightly, but he wasn't ready to pass up the rare chance to vent his frustration on Komaeda Nagito. "You are Dazai-san's friend." Akutagawa Yunosuke reluctantly spat out the word, then continued more smoothly, "You must know where Dazai-san is. Tell me." "Akutagawa-kun." Komaeda Nagito rubbed his chin thoughtfully, not answering, but instead asking, "When did we last meet?" Not understanding why Komaeda Nagito would bring up something unrelated, Akutagawa Yunosuke frowned but still replied, "Last year, when you were hospitalized." Clearly, there was still work waiting at the Port Mafia, yet Dazai Osamu insisted on staying at the hospital to keep watch at the bedside, forcing him to bring the documents that needed signatures all the way to the hospital. This was also one of the reasons Akutagawa Yunosuke found Komaeda Nagito irritating. "So, it's been that long." Komaeda Nagito sighed lightly, shaking his head. "Last time, I could sense some progress, but this time it feels like Akutagawa-kun is still just as impulsive, hardly any progress at all." Akutagawa Yunosuke's eyes narrowed, his coat flaring out as if caught by the wind. He almost attacked but barely managed to restrain himself. "Why do you say that? Just because we're friends and you think that means I would definitely know where Dazai-kun is, doesn't that reasoning feel a bit forced?" Although he did in fact know, Akutagawa Yunosuke's line of logic really left Komaeda Nagito mentally exhausted. Even if Akutagawa Yunosuke only believed there was a chance he knew, wouldn't that be more reasonable? What was with this unwarranted certainty? Was Dazai-kun incapable of even deceiving Akutagawa-kun? Akutagawa Yunosuke gritted his teeth. "You obviously know." "Ah. Dazai-san escaped because of you, didn't he?" Komaeda Nagito. The previous rumors in the Port Mafia had been suppressed by Dazai Osamu himself, but after his escape, they came flooding back, amplified and exaggerated to absurd proportions. Even Akutagawa Yunosuke, who had never cared about such gossip, had heard enough to fill an ear. "They say Dazai-san escaped because his friend almost got hurt by Mimic." "Huh. Wasn't it that guy who often visited the headquarters, Komaeda-kun? What's his connection to Mimic?" "I heard Mimic attacked Komaeda's house, and Komaeda almost died because of it." "Then why blame it on the Port Mafia? Shouldn't Mimic be the one at fault?" "Shush." Apparently, when things went down, the boss held Executive Dazai. Dazai-san back, not letting him go. But later, he found out his friend was involved, so it caused bad blood? Wait, isn't this the same Komaeda who was rumored to have gotten a room with Dazai-san before? What, are they lovers? What, are they living together? What, are they planning to escape abroad to get married? Among those who had no first-hand knowledge of the events, scattered fragments of information were pieced together into a patchwork of chaos. Despite the timeline being jumbled, the locations mixed up, and the specifics of what actually happened wrong, even those who knew the truth could not help but get caught up in it. People love gossip.jpg. Just like science suggests that swearing can relieve stress, spreading rumors about a fugitive executive also seemed to help. Only Akutagawa Yunosuke, the odd one out, had taken the gossip seriously, analyzing it with his still underdeveloped intelligence network, reaching a single conclusion. Dazai-san had likely eloped with Komaeda Nagito. Looking back now, that time he went to the hotel to call on Dazai-san. Why hadn't Dazai-san just booked another room? Why insist on staying at someone's room? And the time at the hospital, keeping someone company at the bedside doesn't normally go to that extent. And living together? It's not like Dazai-san didn't have his own place. Isn't the Port Mafia dormitory good enough? Although it had only been a year, Akutagawa Yunosuke had come to understand the deeper meaning of "open a room" beyond its literal interpretation. He felt as if the door to a new world had opened up for him. Many questions that had previously been unclear to him now seemed to have answers. The most frightening thing was that, due to multiple rounds of embellishment by rumors, Akutagawa Yunosuke wasn't even aware that some of those rumors originated from himself. He earnestly believed the various second-hand accounts and fan theories, but in the end, the only conclusion he could come to was one that even those spreading the rumors didn't believe. After a brief moment of confusion, Komaeda Nagito spoke somewhat subtly. "No, I think Dazai-kun must have had a different idea. I shouldn't be that important to Dazai-kun to this extent." Seeing Komaeda Nagito's reaction, Akutagawa Yunosuke, who had been completely absorbed by the rumors and his own analysis, immediately felt indignant on Dazai-Osamu's behalf. For a moment, he nearly forgot that Dazai-Osamu was no longer his superior and spoke with indignation. "Dazai-san has done so much for you. He even accompanied you while you were hospitalized, threw aside his work, and opposed the boss for your sake. He even went as far as to run away. And yet you still doubt Dazai-san's feelings for you? Akutagawa-kun, calm down a bit." Komaeda Nagito sighed. "You're making Dazai-kun sound as if he's acting without thinking. I'm beginning to wonder if you might actually resent Dazai-kun." "Of course I would never." Halfway through his sentence, Akutagawa Yunosuke finally remembered that Dazai-Osamu had fled. He swallowed the rest of his words just in time. He looked at Komaeda Nagito and finally began to sense that there might be something wrong with his conclusions. So, with great effort, he tried to maintain his composure and asked, "Do you really not know where Dazai-san is? Are you sure Dazai-san didn't plan to elope with you?" Komaeda Nagito. Chapter 86 End. Chapter 87 Touching the flower will also. After being stunned into silence for a second by Akutagawa Yunosuke's shocking outburst, Komaeda Nagito still maintained his smile and asked, "Is that what had been circulating in the Port Mafia?" Feeling an inexplicable pressure from Komaeda Nagito, Akutagawa Yunosuke frowned. "Yes. Is that not the case?" Komaeda Nagito sighed, took out his phone, and opened up his inbox to show Akutagawa Yunosuke. "Look, since a while back, Dazai-kun hasn't responded to my emails." This was true, since after that, Dazai-Osamu had simply appeared at his home without needing to use his phone to communicate. Akutagawa Yunosuke wasn't polite about it either. Since Komaeda Nagito had shown him the evidence, he directly took the phone and scrolled up, finding out that Komaeda Nagito was indeed telling the truth. How could this be? Akutagawa Yunosuke, who has no self-awareness about his analytic skill, was truly shocked. Could it be that all of his deductions had been completely wrong? Fortunately, although Akutagawa Yunosuke had no self-awareness about himself, he still wore an extremely thick filter when it came to Dazai-Osamu. After a brief contemplation, he came to a new conclusion that would not only confirm his own deductions but also explain the current situation. "I understand now. Dazai-san must have known all along that I would come here." "That's right. Dazai-san predicted his prediction." Dazai-san was so smart, of course, he'd foreseen that he would come looking for Komaeda Nagito. No wonder Komaeda Nagito seemed so suspicious, yet Boss Mori never ordered an investigation into his house. The boss had surely also predicted that Dazai-san predicted it. As expected of the boss, truly reliable. He should indeed follow the boss's orders and focus his energy on his work rather than monitoring Komaeda Nagito's house. At least in the short term, Dazai-san would not appear at such a predictable location, nor would he easily contact Komaeda Nagito. Akutagawa Yunosuke, having previously been convinced that Komaeda Nagito knew of Dazai-Osamu's whereabouts, now firmly believed in his own conclusions, and then politely apologized. "My apologies for disturbing you. I shall take my leave now." Komaeda Nagito took back his phone, waved his hand dismissively, and watched as Akutagawa Yunosuke left. He then picked up the calico cat from the corner of the street and began heading home. Sensei, when did you get here? Natsume cat meowed, meow. There's no way to answer in this form. This child really has a wicked sense of humor. Still, the rumors among Port Mafia were truly outrageous. And Mori Ogai didn't bother to deal with it. Natsume Soseki watched the entire event unfold, mentally noting it down to Mori Ogai, and nestled into his disciple's embrace as they went inside. Then he saw Dazai Osamu, who was in the living room, boiling water. Natsume Soseki's originally calm demeanor immediately deflated. Dazai Osamu glanced at the cat in Komaeda Nagito's arms and greeted casually, as if this were his own home, Komaeda-kun, welcome back. Meow. Natsume cat meowed discontentedly. Ignoring the cat's complaint, Dazai Osamu smiled and asked, Akutagawa-kun left? He left after I showed him the inbox. Komaeda Nagito asked incredulously. He didn't even consider the possibility that I might have forged or deleted the emails. Understanding Akutagawa Yunosuke's thought process, Dazai Osamu calmly replied, he probably just wanted a reasonable explanation. Akutagawa-kun's thoughts are still pretty predictable. Then did you predict he'd mention our elopement? Dazai Osamu raised his eyebrows in surprise. Really? Though it's possible. Did he really say that? Komaeda Nagito sat down on the sofa, placing Natsume cat on his lap and stroking it. He did. To be honest, I was really surprised when I heard it. I didn't expect Dazai-kun to be seen that way by him. He hesitated, unable to find a suitable word to describe it, and moved on. He clearly looks like he respects Dazai-kun a lot, yet when he thinks about your actions, it's as if he's thinking in terms of some third-rate novel plot. There are probably too many rumors. When I was around, I could control them a bit. Now that I'm not, they've surely relaxed. Seeing the water had boiled, Dazai Osamu deftly went to the kitchen, took out some tea leaves, and returned with 3 cups of tea, setting them on the table. Sensei, could you get off Komaeda-kun? Natsume cat. Honestly, Natsume Soseki had already guessed that Dazai Osamu had seen through his disguise. After all, Dazai Osamu was the only one who was never able to touch him before. Back when they were at the Lupin bar, Komaeda Nagito had paid close attention to this as well. To someone who was already suspicious, it was far too obvious, and given the way Dazai Osamu's mind worked, figuring it out was only a matter of time. Fortunately, Dazai Osamu, despite his cunning nature and occasional lack of concern for the bigger picture, was truly loyal to his friends. He wouldn't do anything to him for Komaeda Nagito's sake. So it was fine if he was found out. It was just that when he himself had been soothed into a state of comfort by his disciple, and Dazai Osamu suddenly pulled something like that, it's a little bit embarrassing. But it didn't matter. As long as he wasn't embarrassed, the embarrassed ones will be others. With great dignity, Natsume Soseki shook off his fur, leaped down from his disciple's lap, and jumped to an unoccupied spot on the sofa, transforming back into his human form. When did Dazai-kun figure it out? Komaeda Nagito, unconcerned about his teacher's awkwardness, asked curiously. I found out last year, Dazai Osamu answered readily. But it wasn't appropriate to expose Sensei's transformation in a public bar, right? I'm so considerate. Human form Natsume Soseki, ahem. This brat's skin was thick enough to get by anywhere. Without changing his expression, Dazai Osamu pushed a cup of tea forward, putting on a look of utmost respect. Sensei, have some tea. Natsume Soseki dared not drink it. This brat was cunning and seemed to have a grudge against him. Although he wouldn't poison him, he'd likely play some small trick that would be too embarrassed to snitch it to Komaeda Nagito. No need. I'm getting old and tired. I'll probably go to sleep soon. Natsume Soseki found an excuse to avoid it, then asked, since you knew so early, why are you only mentioning it now? Did you need something from this old man? Oh, I just happened to see Sensei, so I thought I might as well ask for some advice. What do you think I should do after running from Port Mafia? Dazai Osamu called him sensei so warmly, but it only made Natsume Soseki feel a headache, though he couldn't say anything about it. After all, with his profession, everyone called him sensei. It was a normal way to address him, but Dazai Osamu calling him that felt like he was taking advantage of him. No one else made him feel this way, only Dazai Osamu. Although Natsume Soseki found Dazai Osamu inexplicably unpleasant, he wasn't unwilling to answer. Do you have any thoughts yourself? How about the armed detective agency? Of course, Dazai Osamu had his own ideas. He not only mentioned his thoughts but also sought an opportunity. Sensei, you know the president of the armed detective agency, right? Could you write me a recommendation letter? Natsume Soseki. Komaeda Nagito coughed. Sensei, I didn't tell him this. I didn't tell anyone. Natsume Soseki confirmed. Dazai Osamu probably knew more than he thought, and the root cause. Likely because of his repeated attempts to connect with Vangala and that 10-year bazooka. Talking about career and future was a serious matter, and Natsume Soseki felt that if someone like Dazai Osamu was willing to work for the good side, it would be a good thing. Therefore, his attitude became serious. Why do you want to join the armed detective agency? Is this an interview? Dazai Osamu chuckled. If you ask why. Because I couldn't find the answer at Port Mafia, so I want to see if I can find it on the opposite side. Natsume Soseki disapprovingly tapped the floor with his cane. Be sincere. Fine. Dazai Osamu raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I just think the armed detective agency suits me better. Besides, I can't be unemployed and homeless at such a young age. If I were to join another organization, no one would be able to rest easy, right? Unless I joined the special division, but I don't really fit in with such orderly places. Natsume Soseki nodded slightly. Although Dazai was still glib, his words did seem somewhat credible. They both understood that if Dazai continued to stick around in Dark Side, changing organizations wouldn't necessarily be as safe as having someone like Mori Ogai, especially concerning Komaeda Nagito. During the time Dazai Osamu was with the Port Mafia, Mori Ogai was Komaeda Nagito's senior. Even if he wanted to go after Dazai Osamu, he wouldn't deliberately trouble his junior, and might even protect Komaeda Nagito from being bothered by other organizations in Yokohama. With a different organization, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. After all, they don't care much about principles, and there are many fools. A lot of people don't understand the concept of not making a move is the real threat. Once you make a move, it only creates enmity. They might even try to use Komaeda Nagito to gain leverage for something. So if he were to change, it could only be to an organization in the lawful side of society. Dazai Osamu knew a lot of information, and joining the armed detective agency was likely a well-considered choice. In fact, if it came to making a recommendation, he would recommend the armed detective agency to Dazai Osamu. But still, the reason isn't good enough. Natsume Soseki said bluntly, this old man won't easily open the back door for you, and besides, to join the armed detective agency, your record doesn't meet the requirements. You'll need to clean up your records. Dazai Osamu replied straightforwardly, of course. In that case, I'll trouble Sensei to give me a suggestion for that. This old man hasn't agreed to anything yet. You moved too fast. In truth, the investigation had already mostly been completed by Natsume Soseki the year before. He had understood Dazai Osamu well enough, and after asking a few peripheral questions that couldn't be directly answered, he ended up agreeing and decided to refer Dazai Osamu. Komaeda Nagito watched Dazai Osamu looking very enthusiastic about finding a job for a while, then returned to his room to prepare for his studies. After all, the new school term was about to start, and he still needed to study hard for the university entrance exams. No one knew how much time had passed when Natsume Soseki finally got rid of Dazai Osamu and entered Komaeda Nagito's room. He came in, closed the door, and his first words were to confirm something. The phrase, even touching cotton can cause injury, was that something the Dazai Osamu of Another World wrote in a semi-autobiographical work to describe the protagonist? Komaeda Nagito replied with some curiosity, it was called a semi-autobiography, but there's actually some debate about that. However, it's true that he wrote it. Why do you ask? I just couldn't quite believe it and wanted to confirm. Good grief, he had thought he was getting old and his memory was failing him, that the original phrase should have been, even touching cotton will cause trouble. Chapter 87 End. Chapter 88, Whitewashing Records. Natsume Soseki originally came just to chat with Komaeda Nagito for a bit. He had been busy with a chaotic mess, even going so far as to get Fukuzawa Yukichi to help out. Today, he finally had the free time to check in on this disciple of his, who had ended up putting their big fish into prison. He thought Dazai Osamu might maintain his usual high-quality silence, but as soon as he entered, Dazai Osamu tore into him without any courtesy and even asked for a letter of recommendation. So now, he finally had time to talk to his disciple. Natsume Soseki had initially intended to share a few heartwarming words, but with Dazai Osamu right outside, he didn't dare take any risks. Who knew if Dazai would burst in after just a few sentences? So he skipped the usual greetings and got straight to the point. Mori Ogai is your senior, you know that, right? I know. Komaeda Nagito looked at Natsume Soseki with admiration. As expected of Natsume-sensei, all your students, aside from me, are accomplished and full of hope. Natsume Soseki already knew that Komaeda Nagito held Mori Ogai in high regard. Moreover, he was quite immune to sarcastic remarks, so he calmly replied, you're still young. When you reach their age, you'll also have your own achievements. Ha ha ha, thank you, sensei, for having such faith in me. Komaeda Nagito scratched his cheek shyly. Too bad I'm not skilled in anything. All I have is luck. Natsume Soseki's eye twitched. Luck, huh? What kind of luck was that, anyway? Until now, all of his previous incidents were just minor trouble, but this time he not only sent mimic packing but also managed to bring Dostoevsky into it. He had truly shocked everyone. Thankfully, there weren't too many people in the know. The Port Mafia even thought it was Mimic who had kidnapped Komaeda Nagito. And as long as Dazai Osamu kept his mouth shut, it was safer for everyone. Dazai Osamu might be on the run now, but Mori Ogai was still around, so there wouldn't be any over-the-top rumors. For now, things could still be considered stable. However, at this rate, Komaeda Nagito was bound to make another big splash sooner or later. Even Natsume Soseki couldn't guarantee that every time, the aftermath could be cleaned up completely. Take this recent incident for example, if there had been cameras around, it would have been difficult to get Komaeda Nagito out of it. One could only say his luck was quite good. Natsume Soseki thought seriously about why previous incidents were just minor troubles, while this time things had escalated. In the end, he concluded, Komaeda Nagito needed to stay in school. At least then, he caused fewer problems. Thus, Natsume Soseki took the opportunity to say, it's alright if you're not skilled in anything right now. You're still in school, and your priority is to build a solid foundation. If there's anything you want to learn that's not taught at your school, you can let this old man know, and I'll tutor you. There was nothing unusual about these words. Any responsible guardian would say something like this to a child. Komaeda Nagito had no objections and nodded to indicate that he would study well. But you've missed a lot of classes, ah. Natsume Soseki continued gradually, missing so many classes in 11th and 12th grades could make it difficult to get into a good university. I remember your goal is Tokyo University. While I could put you in, that kind of approach wouldn't mean anything to you, would it? In a world without Hope's Peak Academy, Komaeda Nagito naturally set his sights on the top domestic university, not that he had particularly high expectations of himself. Though he did think he should be able to get in, the main reason was that the best schools had the most hope. He wanted to attend a school where he could be close to hope. After graduating from a top domestic university, if he still hadn't figured out his career path, he could study abroad. Komaeda Nagito never lacked money, and he was willing to pursue hope for his entire life. But as Natsume Soseki said, Komaeda Nagito couldn't keep skipping classes. Using Natsume-sensei's connections to take shortcuts would be an insult to Komaeda Nagito. While he often put himself down, it was only in comparison to talents. Compared to ordinary people, he was quite confident. But although Komaeda Nagito is smart, he wasn't so brilliant that he could get into Tokyo University simply by self-study. After all, in another world, he himself hadn't even been able to properly attend classes for very long in high school. He even ran into trouble before he could even finish high school. Now, with his memory restored to an ordinary state, he had no real advantages, he could only rely on himself. Although he understood that. Sensei. I don't want to miss classes either. Komaeda Nagito smiled helplessly. But I can't control things like accidents. Even if he considered passing the entrance exam without issue to be lucky and hoped his good fortune would help him, the college entrance exams were still over 2 years away. It was unlikely that nothing unfortunate would happen during that time. Just in this past year, he'd already been hospitalized twice, and falling behind in his studies seemed inevitable. Looks like preparing for makeup lessons is the way to go. Komaeda Nagito began to think, but I hope we can find a tutor who's a bit tougher. Natsume Soseki. Forget about the tutor, anyone who could get Komaeda Nagito into Tokyo University without him attending classes was talented enough already. There was no need for them to suffer just because they were tutoring him. Speaking of which, upon reflection, ever since he took on Komaeda Nagito as a student, he had experienced more bad luck. There was that incident with the stray cat, which led to him being chased by a whole group of strays. Was it somehow related to Komaeda Nagito? Recalling all those unlucky events, Natsume Soseki felt his bones ache. He almost felt phantom pain as if his tail had been bitten. Quickly, he cleared his throat, regaining Komaeda Nagito's somewhat drifting attention to avoid diving deeper into unpleasant memories. Oda is still alright, but in the next couple of years, Dazai Osamu will likely have a lot of trouble around him. You already tend to get caught up in accidents easily, add a Dazai Osamu on top of that, and this old man would worry that you might get kidnapped the day before the college entrance exam or something. Natsume Soseki said, quite objectively. Besides, if he's planning to whitewash his records, at least for the next year, he probably won't be hanging around near your place. He might even go missing for a while. Ah, Komaeda Nagito blinked. He's going to disappear. Natsume Soseki tentatively asked, will you miss him? I thought you two got along quite well. Ahaha, how could that be? Dazai-kun going missing is for a better future, right? Of course, I want to wish him well. Komaeda Nagito laughed, waving his hand dismissively. But it's a bit of a pity, after all. We've been roommates for quite a while now, and to be honest, Dazai-kun's cooking isn't bad. Though sometimes the results could be a bit strange, the taste was undeniably good. Komaeda Nagito's praise for his cooking came from the heart. Natsume Soseki let out a sigh of relief. I'm genuinely glad. Natsume Soseki finally got to say these words. Before, he had felt a bit uneasy, unable to express them. You have quite a few friends now, and I hope you can enjoy the youth that comes with your age. After all, life is hard to rewind. Even in another lifetime, most of your cherished memories were probably at school, right? Making more friends won't harm you. As for what Dazai Osamu thought, that was none of his concern. He was just an old man thinking for his young disciple. After that, Natsume Soseki carefully introduced Komaeda Nagito to his two seniors, providing examples of when to look for which senior. He tried his best to prevent future catastrophic incidents. If not for Fukuzawa Yukichi taking Yosano Akiko with him, Komaeda Nagito would have almost died, and that was terrifying. The conclusion was simple. First, look for Fukuzawa Yukichi. If he couldn't handle it, then look for Mori Ogai. If Mori Ogai was unwilling, then find Natsume Soseki. Komaeda Nagito naturally responded with a series of yes, 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 even expressing heartfelt appreciation towards Natsume-sensei that could fill 800 characters. Unfortunately, Natsume Soseki saw right through him, knowing that even if Komaeda Nagito agreed now, he wouldn't necessarily follow through. But it was better to say something than nothing, because without saying anything, Komaeda Nagito would definitely act on his own. Saying it might make him listen a few more times. After Natsume Soseki, filled with melancholy, transformed into a cat and left through the window, Dazai Osamu seemed to perk up slightly, holding his phone as he approached. Komaeda-kun. Oda Saku said he's free today. Should we go have a drink? Consider it my farewell. Farewell? So soon? Although he had just heard from Natsume Soseki that Dazai Osamu would have to leave during the period when his records were being cleared, Komaeda Nagito really hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Dazai Osamu waved his phone around. While you were chatting with Sensei, I was making arrangements with the guy helping me clear my record. Turns out it's Ongo. Honestly, he's such a pain. Since I pushed for a shorter timeline, he told me about my first assignment early. How long will you disappear this time? Komaeda Nagito asked in a joking tone. Who knows, Dazai Osamu said with a grin. It's an undercover mission. Maybe a month, maybe 8 or 10 years. I could even die during the mission. If that happens, to you, Komaeda-kun, it'll be like I vanished forever. Komaeda Nagito wasn't having it. Dazai-kun, you're getting your record wiped, not signing up to be their workhorse. There's no way you'd agree to something inefficient like that, right? Sure, it might take at least 2 years to clear, but 3 to 4 years at most. If it were any longer, you'd definitely refuse. Dazai Osamu drew out his response. As expected of Komaeda-kun, you really know me well. I was hoping to see you be a bit sentimental, though. Komaeda Nagito sighed as he looked at him. And if you did, what difference would it make? Dazai Osamu, still in a joking tone, said, maybe it'd make me reluctant to go too. Dazai-kun, you can be a bit clingy sometimes. If it's because of someone like me that you can't get your record cleared, then I wouldn't know how to apologize. Komaeda Nagito instinctively looked away, trying to cover it up by stepping forward and giving Dazai Osamu a push. Weren't we going to Lupin? Let's go. Catching every little detail, Dazai Osamu smiled brightly. Alright. Since it's a farewell, Komaeda-kun, maybe you could actually try having a drink this time. Chapter 88 End. Chapter 89, Two people not drunk talking like they're drunk. Tokyo is very close to Yokohama. Even if the port mafia driver wasn't around to pick them up, Dazai Osamu and Komaeda Nagito still reached their destination fairly quickly. As they walked in, they immediately saw Oda Sakanosuke already sitting there, seemingly busy writing something. Komaeda Nagito was a bit surprised, turning to Dazai Osamu and whispering, if Oda-san had to rush a manuscript, he could have waited a couple of years before coming to this gathering, right? Why let such a small event interfere with his writing? Dazai Osamu, no, he doesn't have a manuscript to rush. Gathering again in 2 years, Komaeda-kun really didn't think about him at all. Or maybe he did. If Oda Saku didn't come, Komaeda-kun might have thrown him a separate farewell party. Just as Dazai Osamu was using the intelligence that made countless people fear him to analyze Komaeda Nagito's thought process, Oda Sakanosuke also noticed their arrival and greeted them. Dazai, Komaeda-kun. Oda Sakanosuke said while tidying up the papers in front of him, then, based on the few fragments of conversation he had just overheard, explained, these aren't manuscripts, just some letters. Komaeda Nagito realized, readers' letters? Yeah. Oda Sakanosuke put away the papers and pen to avoid dirtying them. Engaging with readers provides some inspiration as well, so maybe it's better not to become a full-timer. Dazai Osamu and Komaeda Nagito sat down, waiting for him to continue. One needs to observe society and interact with people more. It's still better to have some kind of job. Oda Sakanosuke said, Sensei recommended the Armed Detective Agency to me. After I finish the manuscript in a few days, I can start interning there. Dazai-Osamu, I guessed as much. Oda Sakanosuke was different from him. He hadn't killed anyone for years, just doing odd jobs at the lowest level, never even using his real name when he was a hitman, making it easier to clean his slate. Leaving the port mafia and finding a job afterward wasn't hard for him. How coincidental. Komaeda Nagito commented, but the armed detective agency really suits Oda-san. Oda Sakanosuke nodded, that's what sensei said too. Dazai-Osamu raised his hand and enthusiastically called to the owner, boss. I'll have the same as before. As for Komaeda-kun. Does Komaeda-kun want a drink? Oda Sakanosuke suggested, first time, maybe not a strong one. The owner looked at Komaeda Nagito, what would you like to drink? Sorry, I'm not very familiar with alcohol. Komaeda Nagito thought for a moment, then asked, where are the wines? The owner stepped aside and gestured toward a section of the shelf for Komaeda Nagito. Komaeda Nagito casually said, I'll take the one you're pointing at now. Dazai-Osamu asked, intrigued, boss, what kind of wine is that? The owner, who remembered the location of all the bottles in his bar, pulled out the bottle and replied, it's a French Grenache, low in alcohol content, suitable for first-timers. Komaeda Nagito smiled slightly, seems like my luck isn't too bad. Dazai-Osamu didn't really care what Komaeda Nagito was drinking, after all, the main thing was the atmosphere. Somehow, it felt a bit strange for Komaeda Nagito to be the only one drinking juice. Once their drinks were served, the three of them silently took a sip. Dazai-Osamu rested his face on his hand, watching Komaeda Nagito's reaction, and suddenly laughed. Komaeda-kun, have you had alcohol before? Ha ha ha, caught me. Komaeda Nagito replied sheepishly, I once drank a little because of an accident. How's your alcohol tolerance? Komaeda Nagito shook his head, not really sure. How about you, Dazai-kun? He often saw Dazai-Osamu drink, but Dazai always put a large piece of ice in his drink, making it hard to gauge how much he actually drank. Dazai-Osamu pondered, I don't know either. Now that I think about it, I haven't tried drinking enough to get completely drunk. Oda Sakanosuke was really worried about the two of them getting drunk together. With Komaeda Nagito around, he feared they might end up falling into a sewer on their way home. Take it easy. Dazai, don't you have to leave tomorrow? It's fine. We should give the other party some time to discuss. Dazai-Osamu said casually, then downed half of his glass in one go. Even as an undercover agent, it's not like you run to the organization right after escaping for just a few days to recommend yourself. Even regular members wouldn't do that, let alone someone aiming to be an executive. He'd surely be suspected. What he needed to do was linger in the area, giving them time to deliberate, and then let them know where to find him. After all, the Japanese government wasn't going to make him file daily reports about every minor thing he did, getting the gist would suffice. Seeing Dazai-Osamu drink so suddenly, Oda Sakanosuke was a bit bewildered. Still, he figured Dazai had it under control, so he didn't continue to dissuade him. He merely raised his glass, signaling a toast. Komaeda Nagito drank slowly, but since his skin was naturally pale, even a low alcohol drink made his cheeks slightly flush. What's the alcohol content of this? Oda Sakanosuke replied, around 10 degrees or so. Low alcohol. Is that so? Komaeda Nagito was feeling a bit warm, but his mind was still relatively clear. Dazai-Osamu drank the fastest and had already emptied his glass. The owner asked, would you like another one? Boss. Dazai-Osamu suddenly suggested, could I be a bartender just for today? The owner was silent for a moment, and, sticking to professionalism, said, sure, at an extra fee. Receiving permission, Dazai-Osamu eagerly turned to the bar, while the owner went to close the door. Before the three inside leave, he had no intention of receiving more customers. After closing, he also left, giving them the entire bar to themselves. Komaeda-kun, Oda-saku, what do you want to drink? Dazai-Osamu held the bartending tools, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the two. I'll stick to what I already have. Oda Sakanosuke politely declined, not particularly interested in trying whatever new concoction Dazai Osamu might come up with. That vitality stew before gave him quite the psychological shadow, which still hadn't faded. Dazai Osamu regretfully turned his gaze to Komaeda Nagito. How about you, Komaeda-kun? Although I haven't learned properly, I've seen bartenders mix drinks. I think I could make a decent bartender. Well, to be honest, I'm not familiar with cocktails at all. Komaeda Nagito smiled awkwardly, trying to refuse, but Dazai Osamu didn't say anything, just stared at him expectantly. Not even 10 seconds passed before Komaeda Nagito gave in. Alright, let me think. While Komaeda Nagito was trying to recall what cocktails he knew, Dazai Osamu had already made himself a drink, sipping while waiting. Oda Sakanosuke identified a few bottles Dazai Osamu had taken. Dazai, that drink is a bit strong. Around 34 degrees. Dazai Osamu swirled his glass. This one is called the Godfather. Komaeda-kun still hasn't decided. Want me to give you a few names? Komaeda Nagito said, I remember some. Long Island iced tea, Cinderella, Alexander. Dazai Osamu shook his head with a smile. Long Island iced tea has a very high alcohol content, you'd definitely get drunk, and Cinderella is a non-alcoholic cocktail. As for Alexander, he looked up the recipe on his phone. Yeah, I can make Alexander for you, it's a sweet cocktail. Oda Sakanosuke was now genuinely worried that these two friends of his would end up drunk on the way home. He couldn't help but pull out his phone to check. The Alexander cocktail symbolizes sweet love, suitable for couples. It seemed like the alcohol content was fine, so there shouldn't be any problem. After making the drink, Dazai Osamu pushed the glass toward Komaeda Nagito, who took a sip before leaving the rest for Dazai Osamu. It seemed like he was treating it as a new game, urging Komaeda Nagito to think of another new cocktail. For almost every cocktail, Komaeda Nagito only took one sip, while Dazai Osamu drank at least half a glass each time. Though most cocktails didn't have a high alcohol content, drinking them mixed was still an easy way to get drunk. Watching from the side, Oda Sakanosuke grew increasingly alarmed until he couldn't hold back anymore. Dazai, you've had enough. But isn't it wasteful not to drink? Dazai Osamu's eyes were red, his gaze foggy. Anyone could tell at a glance that he had clearly drunk too much. Besides, mixing drinks is fun. Komaeda Nagito was already a bit tipsy, otherwise, he wouldn't have gone along with Dazai Osamu so much. Now, after Oda Sakanosuke's reminder, he also realized they couldn't keep this up. Dazai-kun, that's enough. If you keep drinking, we won't even be able to eat dinner. Oda Sakanosuke, you two haven't eaten dinner? It was getting late, and he had assumed they'd eaten before coming over. Drinking on an empty stomach, are you kidding? Komaeda Nagito was half a beat behind in realizing the problem. Earlier, I thought it wouldn't be that much. Oda Sakanosuke, acting like a mature adult, stood up reluctantly. I'll go find the boss to get a sobering pill. Komaeda-kun, keep an eye on Dazai. Dazai, get out there. Dazai Osamu blinked slowly, as if trying to comprehend the meaning of those words. After a few seconds, he lazily emerged from behind the bar counter, sitting back down in his spot. Oda Sakanosuke hurried off to find the owner, while Komaeda Nagito reached out to wave a hand in front of Dazai Osamu's face. Dazai-kun, how many fingers am I holding up? 1. Komaeda-kun, this method really isn't effective for testing if someone's drunk. Dazai Osamu leaned on the bar, tilting his head as he looked at Komaeda Nagito. Do I look drunk to you? Very much so, Komaeda Nagito answered. But I think I might be a little drunk too. There's a saying that goes, a drunk mind speaks a sober heart. Though it's not entirely reliable. But let's just pretend that whatever I say next is something I'll forget when I'm sober. Dazai Osamu's mischievous eyes fixed on Komaeda Nagito, a playful smile on his lips. There's a question I've wanted to ask you for a long time, Komaeda-kun. You already know what I'm about to ask, don't you? Komaeda Nagito was silent for a moment before suddenly smiling. Then let me speak drunkenly as well. Yes, I do know. Chapter 89 End. Chapter 90, Your Equivalent to Hope. Dazai Osamu's breathing paused for an instant before continuing. As expected, he knew it all along. When Komaeda Nagito was chatting with Natsume Soseki, Dazai Osamu listened to the recordings from before. Although the latter part was interrupted, from what he managed to catch, there were some words, like marriage, friendship, and various other topics. It was actually pretty clear. Given Dazai Osamu's understanding of Komaeda Nagito, if he hadn't realized what was happening, then Dazai Osamu would have truly misjudged him. Komaeda Nagito was always clever. Hearing these kinds of topics and not reacting would mean Dazai had seen him incorrectly. As for the thoughts of the other two, Dazai Osamu's, he knew very well that it was all just a nuisance, a way for Komaeda Nagito to have a reasonable excuse not to respond. Dazai saw it as a test to see if Komaeda Nagito would take that excuse. They really did enjoy helping others. It was just that this help wasn't in the right direction. In the end, though, he got the chance to ask directly. Dazai Osamu shifted from leaning on the bar counter to propping up his head, half turning to face Komaeda Nagito. So, what's your answer, Komaeda-kun? Komaeda Nagito stared at the dim lights overhead for a while, seemingly pondering his words. Dazai Osamu did not urge him but waited patiently for an answer. Although we've only known each other for a little over a year, Dazai-kun has become deeply involved in my life. That is quite unexpected. Komaeda Nagito continued to stare at the ceiling, not looking directly at Dazai Osamu as he spoke. This past year, my phone bills exceeded the previous few years combined. Most of it was from calling Dazai-kun. I didn't even realize how much until I checked. And when I woke up from unconsciousness, the first person I saw wasn't a nurse or a doctor but Dazai-kun. I never thought that I'd come to get used to something like this. Dazai Osamu quietly listened, not interrupting. He knew this was Komaeda Nagito sorting out his feelings. He wasn't sure what conclusion Komaeda would come to once he finished. So, I've always been worried about when Dazai-kun might just die. The corner of Dazai Osamu's mouth lifted slightly. To Komaeda Nagito, this was probably equivalent to saying, "You are very important to me. It's a pity I still haven't died, despite attempting suicide many times, creating so many opportunities. Yet, I'm still fine." He smiled faintly. Does this mean I'm lucky, or does it mean Komaeda-kun isn't as concerned as he thought? Komaeda Nagito smiled as well, finally turning his gaze from the void to Dazai Osamu. Quite the opposite, I actually confirmed it. Dazai-kun won't die from such mundane things. Komaeda Nagito reached out and pressed his hand against Dazai Osamu's heart. Then one day you will be killed by my luck, and after that, what awaits me, as the equal misfortune in exchange for losing you, will surely be a dazzling luck like hope. Oda Sakanosuke returned with the hangover medicine. As soon as he got close, he sensed that something was off. Komaeda Nagito lay leaning over the bar counter, his face buried between his arms, Dazai Osamu's coat draped over his body. Even when he heard him return, he didn't move, while Dazai Osamu smiled and played with Komaeda Nagito's hair. Did something happen while I was gone? Oda Sakanosuke put the hangover medicine in front of them. Komaeda-kun fell asleep. It seems sharing drinks with him was a bit much after all. Dazai Osamu took the hangover medicine and consumed it directly. As for what happened? Nothing much, just listen to Komaeda-kun say some drunken words. Oda Sakanosuke hesitated for a moment and asked, drunken words from Komaeda-kun, something about hope? That sounded pretty sober, didn't it? Dazai Osamu chuckled. Well, essentially, it was that no one in this world is more important than me, that I'm on par with hope and all that. Oda Sakanosuke. Congratulations. He remembered when Sakaguchi Ongo was still around, at the gathering, Dazai Osamu once blurted out something astonishing. Could it be that Dazai just confessed, and Komaeda accepted? Dazai Osamu glanced at Oda Sakanosuke, instantly discerning what he was thinking. No, it's different from what you think, Oda Saku. The most important person doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic partner. Oda Sakanosuke pondered, most important friend? Dazai Osamu nodded with a smile. I don't see the difference. There is one, of course. Dazai Osamu's mood was evidently good. Friendship also varies among friends. A romantic relationship only works if both sides acknowledge it. Komaeda Nagito had shown a nearly perfect attitude, yet he had consistently avoided the word. There was only one reason for that. That was because Komaeda Nagito was still concerned that if he had a lover, it would result in the misfortune he wanted to avoid. But as long as it wasn't admitted, Komaeda Nagito only had a few friends, no matter how close they might be. Language has power. The moment you say it, it reverberates in your heart. Similarly, as long as you don't say that line, Komaeda Nagito feels he can still deceive his own luck. How adorable, Komaeda-kun, Dazai Osamu said in a gentle tone. With such meticulous thoughts, the result was already quite clear. Oda Sakanosuke, who was originally sitting on Komaeda Nagito's right, now moved to Dazai Osamu's left to avoid having to speak across Komaeda Nagito and risk waking him. He asked. Is this enough for you, Dazai? Is it enough that he just admits you're his best friend? Don't you need something more tangible? Don't you want to take it a step further? Dazai Osamu had never failed to get what he wanted. Even the friendship with Sakaguchi Ango had ended with Dazai Osamu stepping back first. Sakaguchi Ango had naively thought they could still continue. Being satisfied with just this didn't seem like the Dazai Osamu he knew. This is enough. Dazai Osamu laughed. For Komaeda-kun, this is already the limit. I also have to consider his feelings. Besides, what I want isn't such a shallow relationship. People often elevate love to something grand, as if once you enter a particular state, there are no other answers apart from love. But in reality, a lover isn't necessarily the most important. Among seemingly true lovers, there are often many things more important than each other. That's why there's the saying, death can bring us closer, because other important things are usually concerns of the living, and after death, they dissipate. What Dazai Osamu wanted was equal treatment in return, because he didn't even know what his own feelings were. Love, filth, darkness, possessiveness, delusions. Too many emotions were mixed together, indistinguishable from one another. The only thing certain was that Komaeda Nagito was far more important to him than anyone or anything else. Luckily, he never planned on asking Komaeda Nagito to return those feelings. What he wanted was just, for Komaeda-kun, my existence is the most important, that kind of equivalent status. Such a request wasn't something that a typical romantic relationship could fulfill. If one day you die, it'll probably be the luckiest moment of my life, and from then on, there'll be no luckier moment, Komaeda-kun had said under the dim light, smiling. Those words struck Dazai Osamu more deeply than any declaration of love could. That was enough. We are the most important existence to each other. Oda Sakanosuke looked at Dazai Osamu's smiling face and couldn't help but pat his shoulder. Then you should be careful. Komaeda Nagito's luck will probably be aimed straight at you first. Ah, no need to worry. Given my worth, I'll surely die when it's most useful. Dazai Osamu said with a grin, I'll do my best to make sure Komaeda-kun doesn't have to face a situation where sacrificing me is necessary. It'll be difficult, but I'll try. Oda Sakanosuke nodded, I'll help you. After all, he couldn't just watch as a friend ran headlong down the road to find death. He couldn't stop him, but he couldn't simply let it happen either. Dazai Osamu spoke in a light tone, thanks then. With you on my side, I might live a few more years. It's about time, I'll take Komaeda-kun home first, then we can talk later. Saying so, Dazai Osamu placed his wallet on the bar, then got off the chair. He hooked one arm under Komaeda Nagito's knees and the other behind his back, resting his head on his shoulder. Though he looked frail, Dazai-Osamu's physical strength was undoubtedly greater than Komaeda Nagito's, who rarely exercised. Carrying Komaeda Nagito looked quite effortless. Once he adjusted his stance, Dazai-Osamu gave Oda Sakanosuke a look. Oda Sakanosuke understood the gesture and slipped his hand under the coat, draping it once again over Komaeda Nagito. He then took 2 steps forward to open the door that the shop owner had closed. "Thank you. Well then, see you, Oda-saku. Good luck with your manuscript." After bidding farewell to Oda Sakanosuke, Dazai-Osamu carries Komaeda Nagito outside. Heading back to Yokohama would be too much trouble. In fact, Dazai-Osamu had a safe house in Tokyo, though he rarely used it. Why would he when Komaeda Nagito always provided him with a place to stay? However, Komaeda Nagito's apartment in Tokyo had just exploded, and it definitely couldn't be fixed in a short time. So, Dazai-Osamu decided to simply take him to his own safe house. When they got home and Dazai-Osamu was helping Komaeda Nagito change his clothes, Komaeda Nagito finally woke up. Unfortunately, sleep seemed to have disoriented him even more, and he was even drunker than before. Nevertheless, he stubbornly tried to sit up and change his clothes himself. But his hands trembled so much while trying to undo the buttons that Dazai-Osamu had to step in and help. If it were any other time, as long as Komaeda Nagito was still conscious, no matter how drunk he got, he would never let Dazai-Osamu help him. But after saying those drunken words earlier, he silently allowed Dazai-Osamu to further invade his personal space. Komaeda Nagito lowered his head and watched as Dazai-Osamu fiddled with the buttons for him. He seemed a bit more sober now and asked, "When are you leaving? When will you be back?" "I'll leave tomorrow," Dazai-Osamu replied, glancing at Komaeda Nagito, who looked like he could fall asleep at any moment but stubbornly refused to close his eyes. He smiled, "But with Komaeda-kun's luck, who knows? You might get to see me quite often." He tucked Komaeda Nagito under the blanket and kissed his forehead. "So don't worry about me. Go to sleep. Good night. This world is filled with danger, and I know I'll only die under your luck." Main story finished. Chapter 90 end.